It's now been over 50 years since this iconic photo was taken. Known as the Blue Marble, or simply as the whole Earth, it's a photo with an impressive legacy. It's been shared around the world millions of times, and is used as a symbol for environmental movements, and to symbolize our fragility on the planet Earth. I thought it could be fun to look at this photo as if we were seeing it for the first time in one of our brand new modern telescopes. We could think about whether we can tell that this planet hosts life, and talk about why this photo is so iconic. This famous photo was taken by one of the crew of Apollo 17, the last mission to land humans on the moon in 1972. We aren't exactly certain which one took it, but it was probably a guy called Ron Evans, because on the audio recordings of the mission, he asks for the camera and calls out the frame number of this image. The camera they used was called a Hasselblad 500, and they used a 250mm lens, and it was not easy to take good images with it, mostly because it had no viewfinder, so they just had to point and click. This was to reduce the amount of glass on board the rocket, because it's both heavy and breakable. You do not want broken glass flying around in space. NASA and the astronauts knew they would have the chance to capture the whole Earth lit up like this, and the photo was on their agenda. Timings had to work out perfectly. Well, you need to land on the moon when lots of sunlight is hitting the lunar surface. But the trajectory of Apollo 17 worked out so that just after launch, the whole Earth was being bathed in sunlight too, allowing for this fully lit image to be captured. Since there was no viewfinder, every photo was scheduled, and the astronauts had a list of settings for the camera for each photo. So for this one, they knew they would be on their way to the moon, about 21,000 miles from Earth, and they knew which settings to use to hopefully get a photo in focus. So they just applied those settings, pointed at the Earth, and shot. For the whole Earth, there are actually a few photos taken of the exact same thing, but this is the one that's most often shared. Although it's worth noting that it is cropped and rotated from the original, which you can see right here. In this original, the Earth is off in the corner, and it's actually the other way up. The image was only developed when the astronauts returned to Earth, because they couldn't send it digitally. And since it was a film camera, just like every camera on the mission, it had to be developed by hand in Houston. If we were seeing this image for the first time today, and I was talking about it as something fresh off of something like JWST, then there are loads of interesting things that I'd want to point out. We can start with the impressive selection of clouds, including a massive cyclone up near the Indian Ocean. We can also see pretty much the whole African continent, including the Madagascar island. And on that continent, we can even pick out details like lakes, desert land, and greenery too. This was also the very first time a human had imaged the southern polar ice cap. So that's pretty awesome. Other Apollo missions before this had imaged Earth, and I will talk about some of those images shortly, because some of them are also very famous. But this is the first time that the trajectory had allowed them to capture Antarctica. We can also see parts of South Asia up near the cyclone I mentioned earlier, and there's also pretty good evidence for liquid water on the planet's surface. One interesting thing is that we can't see any stars in the background of the image, which you might expect when imaging a planet hanging in space, especially when an astronaut also in space took the image. This is purely an exposure thing. The Earth would have looked super bright to the astronauts, and the background stars much fainter. So the camera shutter would only have been open for a short amount of time to capture the Earth, and this wasn't long enough for any stars to be captured in the image. If the shutter was left open longer, then enough light would have entered the camera to make the stars visible. But then so much Earth light would have entered that the planet would have been an overexposed mess. We can see lots of green on the surface, which again is a fairly rare thing to see in lifeless nature. That could well be a big clue for life. Why this photo in particular has become so famous, so enduring, and so iconic. Why is the most enduring thing of the Apollo 17 mission a photo of the Earth, and not the shots of the lunar surface that they captured while they were there? Lots of us like the Blue Marble because of the human story that goes with it. A person took that photo while hurtling away from our home, and we somehow feel that in the photo. Blue Marble is such a special photo. I think it's such a hard photo to reproduce. Even nowadays, when we have access to photos of everything in an instant, new photos of the Earth, taken by a human in a tin can, are still incredibly rare. Since this image was taken, no human has been far enough from Earth to even attempt taking a photo of the whole disk. And composites from satellites just aren't the same. They're often stitched together with mismatched clouds, lighting, and weather, and they just don't feel as special. This one benefits from a unique combination of timeline, quality, and perspective. And it inspired a whole generation of stargazers, and it continues to inspire many, many people.